Now, is the web rewiring our brains? That's a slightly alarming title of the next session. It sounds like it should be in kind of capital letters in a newspaper that I won't mention. But this session is going to be chaired by the Chief Executive of the British Science Association, Imran Khan, and I'm going to let him introduce the rest of the panel, so please do welcome them onto the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the festival so far, and what a fantastic question to have levelled at us. Is the web rewiring our brains? I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, there's almost nothing that we do as members of society now that doesn't involve the web in some way. If you want to find the love of your life, you're going to go on the internet to find a date. If you want to go shopping, you'll go on Amazon. If you want to learn about something, you'll go on, the Khan Academy or TED. It really is a hugely pervasive technology that just affects us in so many different ways. And it's not surprising, therefore, to think that given how pervasive it is, it might be changing our biology, it might be changing our psychology, and it might be changing the way we think and do things. And in some ways, I hope the web is rewiring our brains, because otherwise that means our brains are kind of staying the same and not really changing in adaptation. One of the common ideas in evolutionary biology is the sense that the killer app for human beings wasn't our speed or our strength, or even our just kind of naked intelligence. It was actually our ability to adapt and change to different situations. The life that we have for ourselves now is very different to the life that our predecessors had on the African savannah, but our brain's plasticity has enabled us to be successful in very, very different environments. But is that ability potentially a problem? Is the way in which the web is interacting with us and us interacting with the web harmful? We have two really fantastic speakers to give us their perspectives on this question. They're going to speak. I'm going to introduce them. They're going to speak for a few minutes each. Then we're going to have a quick chat. And what we're going to do as soon as possible is open it up to you. We want to hear what you think, what your questions are. Have you heard or seen or felt ways in which the web is rewiring your brain? We're very keen to hear from you. And then we're just going to have a bit of a talk and then wrap up at the end. So I'm very privileged to be on the stage with these two people who are real experts. My only qualification for being here is that I have a brain and I've been on the web, but the two people we have to my right are really experts in their field. Dr. Henrietta Bowden-Jones, to my immediate right, is a medical doctor. She's a neuroscientist, and she's a consultant psychiatrist in addiction. And she's also founder and director of the National Problem Gambling Clinic, and that's based in Soho, which is the first and only NHS multidisciplinary treatment centre in the UK for the treatment of problem gamblers. So she knows a lot about the way in which our brain is sometimes not always our friend. And then to her right, we've also got Professor Gunter Schumann, who is Chair in Biological Psychiatry at the Institute of Psychiatry at King's College London, just down the road. And he's also helping lead on the Imagine study, which is a really fascinating longitudinal study that's happening all across Europe, looking at brain function and the genetics of development, particularly in relation to substance misuse. So again, lots of really interesting perspectives coming at this question of how the web is affecting us in a different way. So I'm going to hand over to Henrietta first to give us her 2 pence worth, and then we'll hear from Gunter, and then we'll see what we've got to say. Henrietta.
Thank you, Imran. Is this good? Can everyone hear from this side? Okay. So on my way here today, I was thinking, how has the web changed the way a London medical practitioner gets on with her everyday life? And I came up with 3 important things. The first one is ResearchGate. Put your hand up if you know what I'm talking about. ResearchGate? Just 2 people. Okay. 3. ResearchGate is the equivalent of Facebook for researchers. And what it does is that it makes you waste a lot of time and energy instead of spending it on your work, because what you're doing is you're looking up other people's research profiles. You're being alerted every time they publish something, and you're given a score. So all of you have a score and constantly are checking to see how you're doing. So most of us eventually end up actually unsubscribing from this. But it is extremely helpful because you can request papers from colleagues, and you know every bit of research that is going on simultaneously in your area or parallel areas. So it's wonderful, and this we could only have dreamt of even only 15 years ago. The other thing is real-time medicine. So I run a ward round every week. There are many patients that I need to hear about, and or meet. I need my team tell me about these people, and there are problems sometimes. And maybe it's about a type of medication, maybe it's about an allergy, maybe it's about outcomes in relation to a certain treatment module. What I can do now is I can get onto the iPad, and within a couple of minutes I can provide the best evidence-based decision that in the old days would have taken us a couple of weeks to do, and many phone calls or letters. So this is fantastic. But the best of all, and I was giggling as I was coming along here this morning, the best ways to change my practical life is the psychiatric selfie. So in the past, I would wait for my patients to come into the consulting room, and they'd sit down and say, "Doctor, I have no idea what's going on. You have to help me. I am feeling dreadful." And I would say, "Well, tell me a bit about it, what is going on, etc., etc." And at the end of an hour's consultation, I would have a diagnosis and a treatment plan. What happens now is that the patients come into the room, they sit down and say, "Well, Dr. Bowden-Jones, let me tell you what the problem is. I've been on the internet. I have bipolar affective disorder. You need today to put me on lithium, and make sure it's lithium carbonate, and maybe with some quetiapine in the evening because my sleep isn't great. And I think after a couple of weeks in your hospital, I'd be fine." And I sit there and I'm thinking, okay, this potentially could be true. I think the internet does provide you with a lot of information, and I think it is possible at times to absolutely get that correct. But a lot of the time it isn't. And the number of people who have gone home with a small dose of antidepressant, or indeed no medicine at all, and just a bit of cognitive behavioral therapy prescribed to them after having come in with a dramatic diagnosis. Some people come in and say, "I'm schizophrenic," and I say, "Well, what makes you think that?" So that is a psychiatric selfie, and it is, it's funny in one way. In another way, it's wonderful that people can be empowered and they can look up side effects of medication. They can be prepared for what is coming to them when the doctor suggests it. I won't take too long. I could go on for hours about this. Instead, I'll move on to letting you know that I have 20 years of experience in treating addictions, and behavioral addictions are, my forte, what I know most about. I see lots and lots of patients with these problems, and the internet has really played a big part in causing people damage as well as good. Now, the ways that people can present when they are spending too much time on the internet varies. Some of the people I see are pathological gamblers, and they lose their family home. I've seen many people who've lost their family home at night on the internet whilst their family are asleep. And people think, here they are, they're just chatting to their mates. They're not, they're gambling online. So that's one type. Gaming, I've seen people lose their businesses because of gaming. 14, 15, 20 hours consecutively, not eating, not sleeping, just gaming. So you can ask me about that. I know a lot about that. Porn and chat rooms, ending marriages, ending relationships. Of course, sometimes you're actually depressed and you're going on to these activities because you're not feeling great as a way of escaping, but we can talk about that. Some people shop too much and they shop online, and again, normally there's an underlying psychological issue there, and they might be trying to fill a void of some kind. I can talk to you about negative consequences of all of these internet activities and what they can cause. The main one I see seems to be, apart from the family relationship issues, seems to be academic. So I have a lot of students who've dropped out of university because of one of the things I've mentioned to you. It's very, very sad, promising futures. People who instead are now signing up and needing to, restart their life in a different direction, having failed exams, and people losing their jobs because they're on the net too much. And what does that have as an impact on their children and their children's futures and their children's anxiety levels and ability to remain within a traditional household that was working well until the internet came along for these people? So there's a lot about vulnerability here. Lots more I can talk about, but I am supposed to stick to 5 minutes. I can also tell you today, if you're interested, into how you can spot any issues. So is the internet taking over for you or one of your friends? And if so, how do you find out? You know, are you irritable when people ask you to stop? Are you very preoccupied with whatever it is that you're doing on the internet? Have you neglected other things that normally you've been excited about, like reading books or your hobbies, because you're spending time at home? Have you lied to people about how much you actually spend on the internet? Etc., etc. So I'm here for you. I can also talk about the neuroscience. I have a neuroscience doctorate, and I was looking at specifically prognostic factors in treatment according to people's neuronal circuitry and reward pathways. But I think I have an even greater expert onto my left. But anyway, I'm done.
Henrietta, thank you very much. That's a huge range of stuff. I'm sure we'll come back to lots of it. I'm going to hand over to Gunter first to tell us about his research and his perspectives.
Thank you very much. So today when I came in was a rather traditional day on the train. So in front of me were two army veterans talking about their assignments and their sons and their daughters and their grandchildren. And next to me, there was a girl, talking on the phone to her sister. So that was okay. At least usual, I was used to that. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Shanghai. I was in the metro. That was different because practically everybody, the metro was full. I don't use the metro in London so much, but the tube. But I'm sure it's the same thing. And everybody was in front of their handsets. And then I went over to to the restaurant, and people, were sort of sitting there and looking at their handsets and playing. So, I was expecting a conversation, but no, they were on their handsets. So that's sort of when it became really strikingly obvious to me that the internet, and especially the mobile internet, is really changing the way we behave, and it's also changing the way we interact. When I talk to my daughter, and she then tells me about her Facebook or her Tumblr, I believe, friends, the fact that they may or may not be physical entities and real persons is not really important to her. In fact, she sometimes feels that, she doesn't really want to know where that person is living and, what the parents say and what they're doing. She really sort of reduces almost, in my view, that contact to her, she reduces it to the framework, so to speak, of the Tumblr chat. So for me, this is when I notice that I'm getting older, right? Because for me, this is a very foreign kind of situation. Now, is that going to rewire our brain one way or another? Presumably, yes. I mean, remember, there's one of the earlier studies that looked at plasticity in the brains, or I think one of the earliest was in London taxi drivers. And they looked at the part of the brain that was responsible to entertain memory, the hippocampus. And then they found that, over time and with experience, the hippocampus of the taxi drivers was bigger than the hippocampus of normal people, essentially reflecting the fact that they had to memorize the street map and find their way around by heart. Presumably, this was before they had invented, Google Maps or something like that. So yes, it's rewiring. It appears to be rewiring the brains. I think one could say that. Now, the important question for me is then, rewiring the brain a priori is probably not a big deal. It's something that is happening, as society changes. But sometimes there seem to be extremes, right? And these extremes, they manifest themselves, I would argue, probably in a cultural and a societal context. So when Henrietta has been talking about, the gambling and the internet gambling, I'm just it's obviously it is a problem. It might become an even bigger problem. But what I would like to know is it in any sort of, principal way, in any fundamental way different from other kind of addictive behaviors, which might include like substance uses, that perhaps might be more traditional or that we are more used to. When I look at the work that's published out there, and a lot of the studies I noticed, especially on internet addiction, they do come, and so maybe the Shanghai experience was not not for nothing, so to speak. They do come from Far East, from Korea, Taiwan, some People's Republics of China studies, some also from European, including our group. And what they find essentially in, when they're looking at brain structures or brain functions and compare those brain structures and functions of people with internet addictions with normal people, more or less, they find alterations which are pretty much similar to those that you would find in people who are at the early stages of a substance-driven addictions. So essentially, it's an alteration of the balance of behavioral control on the one hand, and on the other hand, the reward processing, the importance and the intensity, so to speak, with which I experience rewards, which seems to be, I don't want to say cause, but which seems to have an important role in at least the early stages of the development of addictions. Now, these are not the people that Henrietta is talking about. Henrietta was talking about the people who were sitting there for 14 hours, doing gambling. That is a more compulsive kind of situation, and I know less about that, I have to say. This is something, a later state of addiction. But you also find it, taking the drug or doing the behavior in the face of adverse consequences is a hallmark of addiction, and you find this with alcoholism, with opiates, you find it with gambling. So this is a little bit the introduction that I wanted to give, but I'm really going to run out of things to talk in these 45 minutes unless you have questions and suggestions and things to guide us a little bit. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Gunter. So lots and lots of really interesting stuff to unpack there. I wonder if I could just kick us off by asking a couple of questions of both of you. I mean, picking up on what you said, Gunter, that these addictions and these behaviours that people manifest, they're very much they're cultural. How do we know that there's not just in any culture, there's going to be a certain proportion of people who are at the extremes, who are going to develop addictive behaviours? And it just so happens that what we're seeing now is some of these behaviours manifesting themselves through addiction to phones or through addiction to online gambling. If the internet weren't there and if mobile phones weren't there, we might be seeing a different sort of addictive behaviour. But fundamentally, it's not anything additional. What would you say to that?
To be honest, I didn't hear so
well. Oh, sorry. So this idea that you could say that in a given society or a given culture, there's always going to be a certain number of people who develop these addictive behaviours and addictive personalities. And it might be that the internet or mobile phones are giving us a way to see that in action, but fundamentally they're not adding to the level of addiction or addictive behaviours.
What I'd say to that, well, essentially I'd look at the distribution of the how developed that behavior is and how extensive that behavior is. And then, again, much of psychiatric disorders really are defined by the fact that, by the sort of adverse effects they cause for oneself and for others in a societal context. So it's a little bit of a relative kind of thing. So I would then also want to measure to what extent that might cause adverse effects to oneself or to others. Yeah. And my guess would be, and that's a guess, right? My guess would be that it might not be very much different from other substances, if that helps.
Henrietta?
Yes, I agree with everything Gunter says. There are a couple of things that are interesting. When we look at the prevalence rates, both in the UK and worldwide, of certain internet behaviours, we see that amongst the younger age group, under the age of 25, the prevalence rates are sometimes 4 times the prevalence rates in adults. And partly you can explain this from a neuroscientific perspective, because you are looking at the maturation of the frontal lobes, and the frontal lobes mature later on in human beings, and therefore young people are more prone, particularly in the teenage years, towards taking risks, and taking risks when you have that sort of impulsivity and risk-taking behavior, you're more likely to find rewarding the types of activities that we're talking about here when we talk about the gaming or the gambling. So using prevalence rates is one way, but if you use prevalence rates across the world, you will see that availability is very important, because in Asian countries, the prevalence rates of internet addiction disorders are very, very high compared to Europe, for example. And partly that's a manifestation of the availability and the habits of the population. If everyone in this room drank alcohol from 8 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, quite a lot more of us would be alcohol dependent than the amount in the room right now. So it's about being in touch, and that social norm with an activity, for example, being on your tablet, on iPad, whatever, doing whatever you're doing. And then some people will develop or will already have a vulnerability. There's a whole, and you can talk more about this, Gunter, but impulsivity in 7-year-olds, for example, is one of the greatest predictor of certain problems with the internet in later life. So some people will be vulnerable to developing problems, but may never develop them if they didn't have the exposure.
And just from your work, Henrietta, that obviously people have been addicted to gambling ever since gambling was invented, and similarly with shopping and other behaviours. Is the type of addiction and type of behaviour we're seeing that's specific to internet gambling and internet shopping, is that fundamentally different to what was there before?
Internet gambling as a problem is increasing in prevalence, but as that increases, we see a migration away from other more traditional forms of gambling. So people who may have been heading for the bookmakers to play their roulette machines may now be doing it online because it's easier, because they don't have to leave the house, because they have kids at home they need to look after. For whatever reason, we have noticed at the National Problem Gambling Clinic, the center I run, we've seen a doubling. So from 20 to 40% of people are playing, are gambling online, and these are serious pathological gamblers. This doesn't say very much. It only says something about the habits of the population. It doesn't mean that the products are any more severe. It is just that people have always gambled since, we have knuckle-bone dice from the Egyptian times. People have always done it. And there's always been a vulnerability. A third of our patients have a genetic predisposition towards gambling. They have first-degree relatives with this problem. So if you are vulnerable and you have gambling all around you, some of you will have a problem. But how you manifest that problem will also depend on whether you've got a computer at home and whether you know how to use it, and whether a bookmaker's is closer to your house than, for example, a casino.
We've had a huge amount of interesting stuff there. I'm sure that's sparked off lots of questions and thoughts in your mind. So I'm going to start opening up to questions and points from the audience. Would anyone like to kick us off? We've got a gentleman right on the corner there.